Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the World Circular Economy Side Event 2021. This is an online event. My name is Usha Iyer-Raniga, and I'm Professor at the School of Property, Construction and Project Management at RMIT University. This event today is being organized by Circular Economy Victoria and RMIT University. I'll be your moderator for this evening. I'd like to commence this evening with an acknowledgement to country. Always was and always will be nations first. RMIT and I recognize the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands of Australia and the lands of the Torres Strait. I pay my deepest respects to ancient learning cultures and traditions that have nurtured our lands and waters for thousands of generations. I acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in preserving and protecting country for generations to come. I'm currently sitting in the lands of the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung country of the Kulin Nation. You may want to think about where you're coming from and use some of the learnings from the ancient lands and the ancient people in our transition towards a circular economy. We certainly have a lot to learn from our First Nations people as they touch the earth very lightly. I'd like to let you know that this session is being recorded. Please turn off your microphone and your camera to assist with streaming. You may turn your microphone and camera on when we get to the question and answer session after all the speakers have presented. You may wish to pose your questions in the chat or raise your hand to speak. We have 3 stellar speakers lined up from Victoria, New South Wales, and South Australia. We'll start with the first speaker today, George Osborne from Hume City Council. George's presentation is towards Hume as a circular city. The city of Hume is a large peri-urban municipality in Melbourne. The council boasts 115,000 jobs and about 15,000 businesses. Towards Hume as a circular city project aims to drive new job creation and improve economic growth by attracting smart circular economy businesses, improving business efficiency, reducing waste, and establishing a stronger recycling system. George is the manager of economic development at Hume City, and he is a driving force behind this innovative project. I'll now hand you over to George.
Thank you very much, Usha. I'll share my screen. And hello, everybody. I'll just make sure that you can all see my screen. Is that good? Excellent. As always, a bit of technology challenges getting set up, but we're there now. Look, I'd like to thank Usha and Sean from RMIT University and Circular Economy Victoria for providing this opportunity and organising this event on this incredibly topical subject of the circular economy. I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of one local government, one municipality, which is the City of Hume in Melbourne, as introduced by Usha. The slide here headlines what Hume City Council believes the circular economy has become, and that is a driving issue today. It's not some weird side issue. It's a mainstream activity and opportunity. And on the left of the slide, you can see what Council's position is around adopting a model for the economy. And a lot of it is about economic outcome. But we can't forget that underpinning this is adopting the circular economy has a positive effect on human-led climate change, because essentially it steps us out of that very linear take, make and throw away model and allows us to reuse a large amount of material, which has a number of impacts. It reduces landfill and the issues associated with landfill, but it cuts back on the requirement for virgin production. And potentially also it drives down costs associated with transport and logistics of raw material. A very simple example of that is at Hume. We've laid 111 kilometres of road in the municipality using a recycled road product called Reconifol. And in that has gone plastic from shopping bags. It's had toner from toner cartridges, and it's had recycled asphalt. What many people won't be aware of is that the toner that has been used as a binding agent has replaced something that was imported previously from France. And you can imagine the climate cost associated with bringing something all the way from France. So even, unknown and small outcomes like that can have a significant result, particularly when large amounts of the product are used. Now, we don't do it in isolation. In Victoria, of course, we're guided by the state government, and on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that the state government issued in 2020 its own vision around the circular economy, titled Recycling Victoria, a New Economy. So there's a consistency in language and thinking in Victoria around what the circular economy is. It's an undoubted economic opportunity. It is something that is very important for businesses to engage in, but it's also something that will, in adoption of the circular economy, will have a very positive impact on human-led climate change. In Hume, we believe these are the key elements that will make Hume a circular city. And I acknowledge the work that was done here by KPMG, who worked on a business case for the city. As you look at that circular wheel of circularity, you can see just the huge spread and depth, if you like, of both economic and social opportunities. And these are all associated with embracing the circular economy. We don't believe it is just about working with the business community. We think it's also working with the broader community. And if you like, that becomes a top-down and a bottom-up approach. At the bottom of this diagram, you'll see the Circular Economy Community Education Hub. And this is something that we're already working on, in essence, with CEV and Sean Truick, with a program that is now underway in Hume. So it's really important to understand that the circular economy is not just about business, it's also about the whole community. There are many other opportunities there. One part of that slide that people might not understand is on the bottom left, where it talks about multiversity support for the circular economy. I'll just explain what the multiversity is. It is an arrangement with 10 tertiary institutions and business organisations through a series of MOUs with the City of Hume, which brings opportunities into Hume and makes tertiary and higher education more accessible for residents, but it also makes research and collaboration opportunities with those institutions more accessible to businesses. For instance, Victoria University is working quite closely with a range of businesses on all sorts of different initiatives, and that's made possible through the multiversity program, just so that you understand that. And our thinking is that these, this is a model, this is the model we're using, but we think it is replicable anywhere in Australia. Some of the possible outcomes that we have identified from adopting a circular economy approach are outlined here. Now, one of the things that we determined in seeking KPMG to do the business case was an economic assessment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But in essence, you can see here summarised the sorts of things that we believe embracing the circular economy can achieve, and they're not insubstantial. Attracting 50 new businesses to Hume based on our engagement in the circular economy. new community features, the educational impact, the sense of community belonging, the resource optimization. But those are all things that are really powerful. And we believe that over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, they'll be substantially embedded in Hume. So we have a roadmap. You know, the old saying, if you don't have a destination, you don't know where to go. Well, we've got a roadmap, we've got a destination. Where we're at the moment is we have completed stage 1, and I'll share some of those findings shortly. And we're now underway with stage 2, and I'll talk a little bit more of some of the stage 2 actions at the end of my presentation. And then you can see we've got a number of other steps to get to. Stage 3 probably won't commence, excuse me, until the next financial year. So this is a multi-year program. You know, engaging a large economy isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And yeah, we've got 15,000 businesses employing 120,000 people with a gross regional product last financial year of $15.5 billion. 50% of the economy is in manufacturing, transport and logistics. So you can see how ripe our economy is for really embracing the circular economy as its driving feature. Well, enormous amount of opportunity for us, for our businesses and for our community. So the business case that was developed by KPMG, it quantified 3 scenarios, and the scenarios are listed here. And essentially, Waste Management City was almost like a business as usual scenario. So we've done a bit of work on waste, and you know, there's a few initiatives out there, and it's nothing, you know, too dramatic. Waste Management City, business as usual. The second scenario envisaged some steps beyond that to what we called a resource recovery city. So we ramped up some waste management procedures, maybe introduced an additional bin, a little bit more of separation in the MRF, maybe a little bit more input into recycling. You know, we've stepped it up. We've stepped it up. The third scenario envisaged the circular city, which is fully embracing all of those principles and opportunities that were described in those previous slides. And of course, not that we didn't think this would happen, but we were surprised nonetheless with the outcomes. The circular city scenario was projected to have substantial economic benefit by 2040. Now, remember, I'm coming at this from an economic development perspective, but with a really strong sense of the impact on climate change behind it all. But nonetheless, you can see the impacts on the Hume economy, and this is above the baseline. So this is above if we just kept doing what we were doing now as a waste management city, which is what most municipalities in Australia are doing now. These are the outcomes in 2040 above what we would have achieved if we were just tootling along in a very pedestrian fashion, doing what we do now. Quite outstanding. And for the council itself, a $12 million a year reduction in landfill levies is a pretty good sales pitch to the councillors. And anyone here from local government will know how important it is to have your councillors join you on the journey. The economic analysis looked at a number of things. Firstly, the baseline, as I said, which was an assessment of where we were at the moment. They did a number of scenarios and economic projections, which I've just talked about. Absolutely key to all of this, though, was the materials flow analysis. And one thing I have learned is that the materials flow analysis is absolutely fundamental, because in every municipality, it will be different. You will have different inputs, different outcomes, different industries, different businesses. So an MFA is absolutely critical. And you can see the sorts of things that it analysed. So you could apply that to any municipality anywhere in Australia, or essentially anywhere in the world. And that really does establish your baseline. And from there, you can work on those scenarios and economic projections, as I was sharing before. So what we've got currently happening at the moment is a lot, a great deal, and leading the charge on that for Hume is our Circular Business Network Officer, Ian Davies, who's listening in on the presentation tonight. And he wrote half of the presentation that I'm delivering, I should point out. We're lucky that we've got an officer dedicated to this role. Not every council can say that. We're fortunate that we do. But we know he's going to need a lot more support in the years coming forward. So one of the things that we're looking to establish, and this is aligned to that second stage in the roadmap, is a Hume Circular Economy Task Group or Task Force. And we're looking to get members from industry, state and federal government, education sector, and community onto that task force to help guide council in its endeavours as it embeds the remainder of that roadmap in the years into the future. We're really trying hard to attract new, advanced waste and materials reprocessing businesses. And we're not talking here about a mound of tyres that catches fire and you can see from interstate. We're talking about really smart businesses that are making things like shopping trolleys out of recycled plastic, or road base out of toner cartridges and shopping bags. Businesses that are using AI, very advanced processes. And that's where we think the jobs growth will come. Circular procurement. Procurement is a massive lever that local government can pull. We think that the sector is ripe for circular procurement to be really ramped up. We're starting to do that in Hume at the beginning of our journey. We think it sits there smack bang with social procurement and local procurement as a lever for local government. So we're looking to see what more we can achieve with circular procurement in the years ahead. Obviously, in local government, it's all about cross-departmental collaboration. So there's a whole range of things we're doing there. We're lucky to have our Circular Business Network, which has been going for over a decade now. It started out as the Business Efficiency Network. And as I mentioned, Ian Davies is working with that. We're collaborating with the Australian Circular Economy Hub, a federal government funded initiative, which is auspiced by Planet Arc. And I'd suggest you go and have a look at acehub.org if you haven't already. A lot of resources and really trying to set some guidance from an Australian perspective. The last thing I just wanted to share is that we're also working, we're very fortunate, we're working with the government of the Netherlands, the Dutch government, and working through their industry people in their embassy in Canberra. And we think there's a lot of knowledge sharing and learning that can be done between local governments, but also businesses. And there's already a couple of businesses in Hume that have established connections with Dutch businesses and very much focused on the circular economy and circular economy outcomes. That is it for my presentation. There's an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and I believe you can also pop questions in to the chat, and Usha will manage all of that towards the end of the show. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share what really is the beginning of Hume's journey. We did start 18 months ago, so it's taken a little while to get to this point, but I think that's often the case with all good things. I'll stop screen sharing and hand back to Usha.
Many thanks, George. One thing that sort of struck when you were talking was the importance and the role of collaboration. The role of collaboration across businesses, across academia, across community, and certainly a very important foundational platform to support the transition towards circularity. So great, thanks, George, and we'll come back to you at the end with some questions. I'd like to now introduce our second speaker, Dr. Robert Crocker from the University of South Australia. Robert's title is The Challenge of Implementation, Designing a Circular Economy for Regional South Australia. So while there's been some recent policy interest in circular economy across Australia, this has rarely been seen from the perspective of regional development. And it's important for us to think about regional development, because if you are to move towards a circular transition, we need both urban, peri-urban and rural areas and regional areas to be all part of the journey towards circularity. So Robert is going to present about a project that he led, where he's going to be presenting some of the key insights and recommendations. Over to you, Robert. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Usha. Really, and thank you, George, for an excellent presentation. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Oops, oh no, sorry. Thought I was sharing my screen. Here we are. Yeah, so this was quite a small research project, collaborative research project, which was initiated about a year ago, and then COVID hit, so we had to adjust some of our methods, but I think it was still quite successful. South Australia embraced the circular economy in 2017 as a sort of an official government policy. And this built on decades of experience in the resource sector, in resource efficiency, which, they had a very effective zero waste group within the state government who led this, and they became Green Industries SA a few years ago. This little project was funded by Green Industries SA and supported by, in kind, by Good Design Australia, which are the industrial designers in Australia who are all very interested in this, and the Legatus Group. Now there are, because a lot of smaller councils don't really have much funding in the way of funding, they rely on consultancies like the Legatus Group to oversee and develop and push environmental management further in, and the Legatus Group really represent 15 northernmost local areas in South Australia, local council areas. UniSA has a MOU with the Legatus Group, and several members of our team were, while this was happening, working in the background on a sustainable waste management strategy, sort of a roadmap, if you like. So we tended to focus not so much on material flows, but on social and economic outcomes in our study. And it was largely based on qualitative methods, interviews, and then a mapping of what people were recommending. And these interviews were with 22 experts in the field. So we're very much focused on developing an overall implementation strategy for the regions. So there are 8 sort of major regions that are represented in business development, particularly. The report's main aim was to take a snapshot of what is already being done, and to focus on what could be done in the future. And there's a number of overlaps actually with the previous speaker's report, which is significant, I think. Again, we were looking at not just business leaders in the communities, but people already involved or engaged in the circular economy, who were, as it were, representing businesses or community groups or business development officers who are engaged in implementing or working with the circular economy. So our recommendations after a literature review and findings from the interviews were listed as targets divided into short term, which actually incorporated things already being done, and 1 to 2 years, medium term. So I suppose this is a bit like George's roadmap, but a sort of a very cheap version, and then longer term, where you're looking at more investment, more engagement from the community, from the business community as well. So the first sort of target areas was based around capability mapping. And we really emphasized the necessity of that. And so the initial recommendations, which I won't go through them in detail because it'll take perhaps too long, was educating communities, government agencies and businesses of the benefits of going circular, mapping and publicising the region's existing capabilities for circularity. And of course, this is including material flow analysis, encouraging and enabling collaborative engagement in circular initiatives. And one of the challenges is that in many, and I'll mention this at the end, but many of these areas have perhaps a handful of dominant corporations, very much stripped back community services, and a lot of smaller businesses. And getting these to collaborate became apparent this was a critical priority. So, so we decided that each area really needed a regional circular economy coordinator, and that was one of the first recommendations we made. And also, of course, aligning what was already going on with circular economy goals. So, so in terms of the medium term, the targets, we aim to help further develop and integrate the knowledge and experience of the circular economy at the regional level. And circular economy hubs became, were considered really vital in the major regional centres. And to provide opportunities for collaborative innovation and learning, and to incentivize and encourage businesses, organizations, and community groups, such as maker spaces, repair cafes, allied groups, because there are a lot of these groups scattered throughout the country in South Australia, to co-locate to these hubs, and to develop communication and educational packages to be distributed through these hubs to improve knowledge of the circular economy and its connection to the Sustainable Development Goals, which was another aspect of this we considered was important. The other interesting thing was in the country, there was a lot of people involved already in regenerative agricultural solutions. You know, there are little organisations dotted around South Australia in areas such as no-till farming, etc. So there are people, particularly in wine, going organic, doing things like that. And they're already open to circular economy. So we wanted to transfer the leadership program that Green Industries has been running into this space to develop personal, the skills and the abilities of professionals and business leaders. And also to link back to the tertiary institutions, very similar to actually the aims George outlined. So we saw these hubs as important, becoming gateways to more specialised educational and training opportunities linked to the tertiary institutions in the regions and also in Adelaide. The longer term goals, we thought it was very important to collaboratively develop a technology and a digital strategy to enhance transparency and measure progress towards circularity and carbon reduction, with specific reference to the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a lot of really interesting developments in technology in the country. I live in the wine area, and there's a group of winemakers who are using blockchain near me to enhance transparency, to make sure that people know where the wine's coming from and who's making it when. And a lot of this, Industry 0.4 technology is transferable immediately into the circular economy, using sensor technology, for example. So a lot of this is already in place, drones, sensors, etc. So we would like to see a more detailed strategy developed that spans the technical, the digital, and what is already going on in agriculture, viticulture, etc. We also wanted to establish a circular economy incubator program within the proposed Centre for Excellence, C360, which Green Industries SA is helped kind of, has been helping develop over the last few years. And this Centre of Excellence will probably add a bit of refinement into this area so that we can take really good ideas, which might come up, because what we've found is that a lot of the examples of circular economy businesses happen in between firms. They don't necessarily pop out of some major corporation. They often, they're what the Italians would call the long lunch, products of the long lunch. So you might find that somebody else at the table has a technology or a skill that would perhaps deal with a problem you have, such as a waste stream, and that this might actually generate more money, more jobs as well. So we want to really develop that side of it. We want to initiate circular economy marketing and branding package, because we really need to, one of our findings was the difficulty of engaging consumers in the circular economy. You've got 10% or so who are engaged to some extent in environmental issues, but we need to overcome the marketing and branding that dominates the linear economy and nudge it or shape it towards circularity. And that is a very long-term thing. And then of course, we need to develop circular economic policy frameworks and funding programs for business and industry to enable the circular economy and discourage linear economy from continuing. One of the issues in the country in South Australia is a lot of the services have been stripped out. There are a few dominant, companies working, and so there tends to be the linear economy very much dominates with very long, complicated supply chains. So education, allowing people to see the benefits and engaging the whole community, as George was saying, not just the business people, but the whole community, we saw as really, really important. Collaboration being a key word. So regional implementation of anything has always been incredibly challenging, in part because of the linear economy's tendency towards centralization, with many businesses and government services being pulled into the cities. And in part because many business leaders in Australia, as the Australian Hub has found in their various surveys, many of the business leaders still consider the circular economy largely in terms of improving waste management, recycling. We want to go far beyond that, and in the regions. So in our report, we tried to emphasize the importance of approaching the development of the circular economy beyond waste, beyond resources, and from both ends of the material flow pipe, considering the circular economy's advantages from a regional perspective. We emphasize in the report the importance of developing innovative, collaborative business ventures and also social enterprise beyond the perspective of the individual firm, and of engaging all the economic actors in the regions in this process. We emphasize the importance of developing effective circular business models, especially inter-firm relationships. In fact, most of the examples on Green Industries website, of circular economic development between firms. And we also emphasize engaging designers and key stakeholders in this collaborative process, and of nudging consumption towards adopting circular economy through a coordinated strategy of information, education, and policy and legislative change. Thank you. Stop sharing. Oops. Thanks, Usha. I hope I haven't.
No, that's fine, Robert. Thank you. It was really interesting to see some of the parallels between what you were saying with some of the work that George has already been doing in Hume, particularly around some of that grassroots engagement Again, you also talked about the role and the importance of collaboration, but also across the supply chain. And so perhaps there's a little bit of unlearning and relearning that we need to do from linear models into circular models. Thanks again. Let's now move on to a final speaker for the evening, Debbie O'Brien from Lake Macquarie Council. Debbie is going to be talking about insights from contextualizing the circular economy city scan tool. Lake Macquarie Council was the first in Australia to introduce a standalone circular economy role. Under Debbie's leadership as circular economy lead, the council developed one of Australia's first circular economy policies, started upskilling council staff so that learning, relearning, very important, launched infrastructure-related projects, and gathered data to support the journey to a circular transition. I'll now hand you over to Debbie. Thanks, Debbie.
There's always somebody who forgets to unmute, and I thought I would do the honor this evening. So thank you very much, Sean and Usha, for inviting me, and thanks for those great presentations, Robert and George. I could definitely resonate and, sympathize and empathize with some of the challenges that you guys have been through. I'm going to share my screen, and let's hope that we don't have any dramas. We just having a chat earlier, and we were saying that we never seem to have problems with Teams, but I often have problems with Zoom. Can you guys see that okay? Yep, and they're moving along all right? That's usually where it all turns pear-shaped. So again, thank you. What I'm going to talk about this evening is just to give you a brief overview, a little bit about my role, and then a piece of work that the interest started long before I started at Lake Mac, but we actually did an MFA in 2017, the Hunter JO did, and just trying to bring you on the journey we've had from that MFA through the city scan and the learnings that we had, kind of taking these ideas out into the real world and see how they play out. So a little bit about my role. I have three key components to my role. I've got a policy and framework piece, which Usha mentioned, trying to get the circular economy embedded into the way council does its business. Then we have a materials piece where we're trying to decarbonize the materials that we use through council, reframing waste as a resource, a little bit like what the others have talked about, and find ways to reduce our reliance on virgin materials. Very, very important in that decarbonizing piece. And then innovation. How do we, a bit like George talked about, how do we attract innovative businesses into our regions? How do we help the existing incumbents to transition? And although they're laid out there in nice little boxes, they actually overlap, significantly. The innovation, the policy, the materials, they don't sit in silos. They cross over each other. And how do we figure out what the first steps might want to be? And so one of the things that I like to do is instead of getting buried in the weeds, is when in doubt, zoom out. When you want to transition to a circular economy, what are the important things that you need to look at? And we actually looked at the piece of work that South Australia had done, and that analysis piece, and it kind of bringing it out and going, okay, well, where do you start? What material is flowing through your region? And each region will be different. There'll be, regions with lots of, fly ash. There'll be regions with lots of biomass, and there'll be regions with a little bit of both. So it's really important that these pieces of work are contextualized. There is no one answer that works for the same for every area, every city, every region. So when the Hunter JO looked at this piece in 2017 or 18, I think they started in 2017, but the report came through in 2018. So they put out an expression of interest out into the market and said, okay, we want to know what materials are flowing through this region so that we can identify what makes sense to intervene, what materials could we potentially develop some industries off the back of. Can we find synergies? Because really what you want in a circular economy is you want from one industry can become an input to another. So we're looking to find not just what are we going to do with all this waste and make it into cool things, but is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity to provide industrial symbiosis in that space? So when Hunter JO did this piece of work, this is kind of what it ended up with is a typical output like this, which is a material flow analysis. And a huge amount of work went into this, but I think one of the things that didn't go quite the way intended was this is really a waste flow analysis rather than a material flow analysis. So the waste flow analysis missed things like fly ash because it doesn't show up in waste data. So we basically, all the waste data that's aggregated and sent up to the EPA and aggregated, and you really struggle to get it back from that source. So they missed a few things. And the other things that are of interest to me is water and energy. So if you're going to attract businesses into your region, if they're significantly water intensive, well, then they're now going to be competing for a finite resource potentially. And energy is the same. And we're finding that more so in the green energy space, where manufacturers are looking for green energy because that's now become part of their narrative, a part of their branding. You don't want to be selling steel, you want to be selling green steel. So access to renewable energy is also a big component of how are you going to attract businesses into your region. The other key piece that happened after the material flow analysis was the China sword hit. So this significant piece of work captures almost a moment in time. So it captures data as it exists at the time the report was written. And then I think it was within months the China sword slammed down. So a lot of the analysis and the learnings from the opportunities identified didn't really exist anymore because those pathways for that waste were now closed off. There was no market to offtake the really, really difficult residual materials. Fundamentally, that actually offered an opportunity. But when it has a big shock like that, you don't really have time to prepare for the opportunity straight off the bat. And so we saw some, stockpiling of certain materials and trying to find alternatives. And as George said earlier, the circular procurement piece is really important. Procurement is a very powerful lever. And when we need to understand where the mechanisms of, it's not just about recycling stuff and making them into cool products. It's actually using the procurement lever that public organizations have to purchase those products and prefer the purchase of those products. So the next piece of work that we did, we started earlier this year, was it's called a city scan. And we didn't do a city scan, we did a regional scan. Lake Mac is not big enough, we didn't feel, to do just a city scan for just Lake Macquarie. So we collaborated through our Hunter JO circular facilitators group. And we had the City of Newcastle, Central Coast, Hunter JO. We launched this project together. And that was really around trying to understand, again, kind of solve the gaps or tackle the gaps that were left by the material flow analysis. So looking at a much wider pace. So we've just finished this piece of work. We've completed the report, and we are the Lake Macquarie, actually I think it's called Newcastle Lake Macquarie on the City Scan website. So that report is about 80 pages long, and we'll make that, I think it's due to be published end of October, first week in November. We kind of have to socialize it with our exec teams so that they don't feel that they missed an opportunity to have a look at it before it goes out to a wider audience. But we're also looking to do a summary report of that, because let's be honest, geeky, nerdy people like myself and Sean and George might read an 80-page report, but lots of people won't. So we thought we'd better do a brief or more succinct version of that for general consumption. And kind of this is what it's trying to get to. It's trying to provide a little bit like what George said, the work they did with KPMG, try to get an evidence base for where you want to go, prioritize materials that you might want to work with, highlight the sectors that make more sense for your region. And it won't look the same for, you know, it would look different for Hume, or it would look different for Melbourne, it would look different for South Australia, and it looks different for our region. We're a region that's at the pointy end of the transition from coal. We've got 220 million tons of fly ash in the Hunter Central Coast region. So that might be an opportunity for us. So again, it's very, very contextualized. And then you're trying to get, and then it just gives an outline of what the materials that are identified in the scan, but also there's thousands of case studies on their website where you can try and find an opportunity to match the findings that you've got with with an example of a city somewhere in the world that has, you know, started or launched a project similar to what you might want to do.
Have we lost
For
you?
the full
You're
city.
frozen. Sorry,
sorry.
you're frozen on my screen. So I think we lost you for about a minute there.
Oh, a minute. Oh, drat. Can you see my slides now? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So just trying to, just stepping through the experience we had with the circular economy. So this is a website that I believe anyone can dip in and out of, and there's lots of resources on there. So I think I would encourage you to jump on there and have a look. And then it kind of gives you a report and an interface where you can see that, you know, what does it make sense? You can look at sectors, you can look at it by, you can filter the information by greenhouse gas emissions, where are the emissions you might want to tackle a sector there. So we had you know, lots of learnings from this experience.
Eddie, are you there?
Oh, bugger. Sorry, have I dropped off again?
Yeah, you dropped off again, but not very long this time. Maybe a few seconds.
Okay, so sorry about that. Let me know if it gets any worse, and I'll switch over to my phone. I'm almost there. I'm almost done with my presentation. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to outline the learnings that we experienced, which was the City Scan tool. We learned a huge amount from working with the team in the Netherlands, but a lot of the data had to be manually manipulated because the assumptions in their data sets are European, and that includes the amount of renewable energy in the grid, and the categorization of the materials was very different. So, you know, a city scan carried out by the circular economy costs about $200,000, but we did what's called the concierge pathway, where we did a lot of the work ourselves and they gave us access to their platform with some consulting support. So I think the lesson we learned from this is it was fantastic working with the team, but the tool itself is very Eurocentric, and it doesn't necessarily make sense for Australia to be continuing to rely on materials that are, or a platform that isn't suited to our purpose. So I think that's some of the learnings we got from the experience. And I guess the key insights for us are, you know, build a coalition of the willing, a bit like what George has been doing. Find people who are, you know, involved in this space and wanting to go a bit faster. You know, ask the right questions. For us, it's around not jumping to the solution, but taking the time to ask the right questions. And that's the challenge and the joy of working in the circular economy space. We're asking different questions.
Maybe you're frozen again. We head up to the point of the questions, ask the different questions.
Okay, so yeah, so I think the important thing for us was to not jump to solutions and make sure that you're asking the right questions. The linear economy has had 200 years to ask, and now we're starting to ask different questions from a circular economy. Expect bumps along the road. I mean, that's what we learned, that actually we've never done some of this stuff before. So we just need to be tolerant of that, you know, that not knowing all the answers and being comfortable with a bit of a mess. Sometimes these are messy spaces, and that's okay. Not necessarily always a good fit for local government where, you know, the perfect answer is the only answer. So we're trying to move into a more comfortable space with asking and being comfortable with messy. And so again, don't aim for perfection, just accept that you're going to learn something in this experience. And as long as you learn something, then there will be no major mistakes. But the next key piece is have a line of sight for what's next. And that's what we're now having a conversation around. Well, what does CityScan 2.0 look like? And we're looking at more of a scenario analysis approach, or a tool that we could use to run a range of scenarios in light of the lessons we learned from the MFA, which missed certain things and then was hit by a shock from left field of the China sword. And so we don't want the future data sets to be static. So to us, it's important to know where are you going next, and that helps inform where you might want to target your attention in the next phases. And I'm sure George would and Robert would probably agree with that. So sorry about my internet connection. Hopefully it will get better without me sharing the screen. And if I'm still going glitchy, Usha, let me know and I'll switch to my phone.
Many thanks, Debbie. And actually, thanks to all the speakers for keeping to time. It's much appreciated. So we've got a good 10 minutes or so for some question and answer. So again, I think one of the learnings from your story there, Debbie, is, and thank you for being so candid about your warts and all sort of story, because we often hear about the successes, but we don't often hear enough about the challenges. So perhaps I'll start off by asking a question that came from, Sean, you might have to help me here. It came from Sam, I think it was, that asked, it's a question really based for George, but I think it applies to you as well, Debbie. How do you educate businesses on circular economy beyond waste and recycling? And do you believe federal state legislations are needed to boost circularity across your local government areas? So I think, Debbie, you're frozen on our screen, at least my screen. George, maybe you want to start, if that's okay?
Yeah, I didn't quite hear the question properly. Sorry, Usha.
No, that's all right. I'll repeat. So the question was, how do you educate businesses on circular economy beyond waste and recycling? And do you believe federal state legislations are needed to boost circularity across your local government areas?
Okay, thanks for that question. In terms of talking to businesses about it being beyond just sort of waste management and recycling, it does need some formal engagement. It's difficult to convey what the circular economy means through a casual conversation. And so, for instance, in Hume, in the last 12 months, we've run a program called the Circular Advantage Program, which has engaged with around a dozen or so businesses, and it's taken them through a reasonably formal structure of learning. But what has come out at the other end of that is businesses that are well and truly understanding of the advantage of being engaged in the circular economy and all of the things that means for the business. You know, a fundamental shift in the way they plan operations, a fundamental shift in the way they think about resourcing. And right now across Australia, particularly in the manufacturing sector, we're experiencing this contraction of supply chains and challenges with accessing raw material, which is a further driver to thinking about how can we reuse what people consider to be waste. And so there's a number of factors that are playing to the advantage, I guess, of the circular economy conversation. But it's a conversation with businesses that has to have some impact on their bottom line. They do need to see some impact on the bottom line. There's no doubt about that. But I think more and more now they are willing to understand and make space to think about how engaging in the circular economy impacts also on environmental issues and can impact on climate change. You know, less virgin material production, less waste going into landfill and creating methane gas issues. All of those sorts of opportunities, but it does need some, I think, some sort of formal engagement, some sort of program of learning, ideally at the end of which the businesses have got a package that's going to help them on their journey into the circular economy, so they get something tangible from it. The second part of the question about state and federal government, absolutely, they've got to have a really strong leadership position. Like any change, funding is useful, so opportunities for businesses to seek grants to assist in programs. The language as well. We need to start hearing circular economy language coming from our political leaders. The discipline of a common language is really powerful in getting people to change and move. And at the moment, I feel there's way too much talk still about waste and recycling. Let's change the language to talking about the circular economy. And the more people who go, the what, huh? The more of an opportunity it is for us to explain what that is and what opportunities it presents. But absolutely funding, we need to hear the right language from them as well. And like all things with our political leaders, hopefully we'll see some leadership in this space.
Thanks, George. Debbie?
Yeah, I think there is definitely this change of narrative required. And when I present, I do a lot of presenting. I almost never talk about waste. I talk about innovation and value add and embracing the opportunities the circular economy presents. To me, waste is just a hygiene factor. Yes, we've created this problem, we need to deal with it, but let's redesign and reinvent the new opportunities. Let's co-design together what the future might look like. So I talk a lot about innovation, and I show them the opportunities. And you know, kind of a powerful lever I find is benchmarking people against their peers. So I show them what's happening internationally, and you do not want to be left behind. And I saw an ad on the TV the other night. I think it was Farmers for Climate Action. And I thought, oh, wow, the same narrative I use, which is new industries are coming, green industries are coming, jobs for ourselves, jobs for our kids. We don't want to be left behind. So I almost never talk about waste. I talk about innovation. And I agree with George, you do need to have some deliberate initiatives to get out there and to businesses. We're looking at developing a kind of a series of workshops for small businesses so that we can socialize and educate them around what the circular economy is. And one of the first things I did in my role at Lake Mac was I put the whole exec suite through circular economy training, because I knew that as the project started to bubble up, it was really important that the execs understood what that actually means, because like George says, 90% of the time people go, you what? So you still have to explain what a circular economy is. So I needed them to at least have that base level of understanding so that when the stuff trickled up, it had somewhere to land. People understood what that meant. And in regards to the state, the regulation and the role of government, governments have always had a very powerful role in innovation. I remember when I did my MBA, we looked at the power that regulation in the United States, California in particular, had around the clean air standard, drove a massive amount of innovation in car design. You know, unleaded petrol, that all came out of a regulation in California, and California is the hotbed of every car design in the world, generally comes from there or is tested there. So the role of government is definitely funding, but it's also flattening, making the rules fair, setting a level playing field so that everyone can innovate in their own way. We're not dictating, but this is the baseline set of expectations we have. And there's absolutely no doubt that one of the reasons that both China and the EU are charging ahead with the circular economy over 15 years has been a coherence at policy and funding level. So they're not arguing or persuading or educating around the circular economy. They have fully embraced this as their new way of doing business. So they don't have to do all the groundwork that George and Robert and Sean and I would do, because it's background noise. They don't even have to argue about it. So, and there's huge billions of dollars in funding over along the Horizon 2020 fund. They had, they're on their like third or fourth iteration of dollars. So, we've got, in New South Wales, the EPA collect a waste levy, $8 billion in 8 years, and 800 million of that was given back out in projects. and the rest went to general funds. And that was, that came up at an EPA roadshow where, one of the, and the CEO was there, where one of my colleagues, well, my peers at a different council highlighted that. Now, the amount of shift and catching up Australia has to do, we can't be sitting on billions of dollars for general purposes when we need to, tackle that sovereign manufacturing, becoming more self-reliant, finding and growing these businesses. Australia is sitting on a massive opportunities. So we need the government to just kind of get a bit more sorted in their narrative. And George is absolutely right. Language is important. So when we hear that from our leaders, everyone else sits up and listens.
Thanks, Debbie. Robert, I wondered if I could turn to you now, because South Australia has been on this journey for circularity much earlier than New South Wales and Victoria. So from the perspective of the question that was being asked in terms of the importance of policies and legislation, but also from a regional perspective, given the work that you've done on your recent research, could you share some pearls of wisdom, both in terms of the policy perspective, but also in terms of how to engage with businesses in circular economy?
Well, I think George and Debbie hit the nail on the head. Language is critical, policy is critical, funding is critical, and collaboration, I think is terribly important, because often you have to, in a way, enable these conversations. And you have to overcome what is often a legacy effect of, we've always done this, we may as well, we do it this way, and that really means, as George was saying, you've got to address the bottom line. You've got to say, well, look at this example, this story. So storytelling becomes terribly important. And Green Industries, on their website, they keep developing little cases to show other businesses what could be done. And, and I think that, to me, the real frontier here is persuading the community. How do you get this language, this thinking into the community, and how do you start reining in some of the excesses of the linear economy? And that really requires government leadership. And I think this is where we've been very strong, banning plastic bags, throwaway plastics, terribly important. We did a little research project at UniSA a while ago on coffee cups. Now, they don't look very harmful, but as every city manager knows, they're, a huge amount of litter is created by these things. And they're not recyclable, they're a kind of problem. And when you go through some of the materials in these analyses, you're looking at, they're often a nuisance, not necessarily because of toxics, but because they're blended. And, this brings into the conversation design. There's no reason for us to continue designing things that are a nuisance at the end of their life. We can do compostable cups quite easily. We don't have to, and this really means engaging businesses and design and the community. And if you look at the literature, in this field, apart from business models, circular business models, which is probably about 20% of everything published is in this area, there's more and more interest in what do we do about consumers? How do we shift consumer thinking and behavior towards this? So there's a lot of attention on this and a lot of interest in the role of design. If, for example, we can take buildings apart rather than demolishing them, in one big bang, we free up all these resources to use in other ways, in new buildings. And as George, your report made clear, that the carbon savings are enormous. We could meet our Paris, targets and probably the Glasgow ones, pretty easily compared to some of the other major infrastructure projects that are in the pipeline. So yeah, so I think design is one thing I'd really like to emphasize, And in terms of policy, engaging politicians in an iterative program where you start to tighten the grip or the noose, if you like, on materials that are a nuisance. You know, like recently in our fires in Kangaroo Island, green industries had to spend a huge amount of money cleaning up CCA. You know, CCA leaves heavy metals. You know, you can't just let it go into the water table, and, you know. So CCA timber, I'm talking about the green stuff that people use in vineyards and fences, etc. We have to phase out that kind of stuff, and there are perfectly usable substitutes, but until we have a disaster, we're not really aware of how bad these things are. So so design, engineering, and also localization, which becomes very important in regions. In South Australia, we have ridiculous situation of you know, people with big trucks moving compost around. You know, every harvest, compost going backwards and forwards. You know, it's insane. I mean, one of the first recommendations we made was to localize, you know, the creation of compost, you know, in the vineyards and everywhere else. I mean, a lot of the smart guys up here are already doing that, but you know, there's a lot of basic things we could do to move this forward that doesn't necessarily entail, you know, rocket science. It's joined up thinking, you know, which becomes terribly important in the circular economy.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time. We've already gone 5 minutes over. So I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. But we could come back to some of the questions that have been asked through the recording. Sean, would that be correct?
Yes, we'll ask our speakers after this to just give us some insights, and then we'll send the answers with the recording.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for your time, and thanks for bearing patience with us. Apologies for going a little over time, but the internet gods have been on our side, except a little bit in between with Debbie. But take care of yourselves, and we hope to see you again in another Circular Economy Forum soon.